I just want folks out in the audience, start thinking about your questions, because you have an amazing brain trust here that's been assembled on these issues. And so if there are additional comments or interaction you want to have, let's do it. If not, I would welcome our folks from the audience to begin asking questions. So whoever wants to speak, just come. See where the microphone is. We'll just stand up in a line. I want to make sure that I get some of the press. It's in the first and second rows. If some of the press can please step forward. I want to make sure you have an opportunity to go first, and because I don't want to run out of time without the press being able to ask questions. So first, let me just take any members of the press that would like to approach. Let me invite them initially to the microphone, please. Just if you could just state your name and identify yourself, who you're with, and ask us the questions, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Abby Sewell, the Los Angeles Times. This question is for Dr. Yasko. I think about a year ago or so, when kind of all the issues of San Onofre were first coming out.
Can everybody hear her back there? No, just go really close to the mic, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think a year ago or so, when the issues were first starting to surface at San Onofre, you'd made a comment that you thought the NRC might need to revisit its processes for how it reviews these types of equipment changes and design changes under the 5059 process. What's your thinking on that now?
Well, I don't think it's really changed. I think clearly at that time we were still, as I recall, reviewing whether or not the steam generator replacement was properly done under 5059 as 5059 was envisioned. And there's, to some degree, there's probably debate about that question, but I think from the agency's conclusion was that some things could be done under 5059, and I think at the time my view was, well, if that turns out to be the case, we probably need to change 5059, because I think if you look at this from the perspective, just from the blank slate, should a major equipment modification like a steam generator replacement be done without a license amendment, I think the answer would be no. And I think, quite frankly, although I don't think Edison Electric would say it today, but if this had happened at another plant, I bet Edison Electric would be saying, yeah, we agree, because, and even maybe Arnie would agree with me that there would have been a better chance. Maybe it's not clear that the NRC would have caught the design changes and what the consequences would be, but there would have been a better chance that somebody would have. And quite frankly, that's in San Onofre's would have been in their best interest, because no matter what, they have plants that are not operating, and that's costing them a lot of money. So, I think clearly that's not a major modification like this is not really what really is intended under 5059, and clearly the consequences of it are such that that's self-evident, I think, at this point. So, I think that does definitely need to be looked at, and it's something that should be changed.
And what's your sense at this point as to whether or not Edison did follow the 5059 process?
I have not followed it close enough to give you an assessment. There's going to be a lot of people are going to be looking to answer that question and get a definitive answer. I think the NRC is doing investigations. Certainly, depending on how the public hearing works out, that issue may be litigated there and may be litigated in federal court. So I think the jury's out on what the real answer would be. But bottom line, I think it should not be a debatable question whether such a large component replacement, it should not be allowed to be done under 5059. It should require license.
Thank you.
Or some review by the NRC.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions, and thanks for the answers. Let's go with the next speaker, please.
I have a question.
Why don't you just raise the mic?
Morgan Lee with the UT San Diego paper. I had a question for the Prime Minister, and I just wonder what advice you would have as Southern California evaluates the situation here at San Onofre, given what he knows about public government regulatory and corporate communications.
3オノフレ原発についてのルールとかそういった細かい点はもちろん私は詳しく知っているわけではありません。
All of the processes we're talking about, 5059, all of these rules and processes and the way the regulatory agencies work vis-a-vis San Onofre, he doesn't know that. He doesn't know those details. So,
しかし2つの点が皆さんの運動というかこの問題では重要ではないかと思います。
however, it's two things in his view are very, very important and that I need to say about our movement.
一つはやはり事故が起きた場合に大変大きな被害をもたらす、あるいは大きな多くの人々の生活にダメージをもたらすというそのリスクの大きさです。
The first one is when accidents happen, the impacts are huge, and it's not just that risk that we need to think about. It's not just the people, it's not just the displacement, it's the economic devastation.
もう一点はよく経済的なメリットを特に電力会社の人たちは言いますけれども、その経済的なメリットということを電力会社の経済的メリットなのか、国民として住民としての全体を見たの経済的メリットなのか、この点を明確にする必要があると思います。
And another thing that's very important for us all to really, really look at is that electric companies discuss the economic merits of nuclear power. However, these economic merits are primarily the electric companies' economic merits. It's very important to understand that these economic merits are not passed on to the people.
原発を稼働させれば必ず使用済み燃料は核廃棄物が新たに生まれます。その新たに生まれる核廃棄物の処理の費用まで含めて考えれば、私はどこの原発でも、これはアメリカあるいはこのサンオノフレに限らずどこの原発でも早くストップさせた方がトータルのコストは低くなると、このように考えています。
And the cost that is not figured into or calculated into the economic merit picture is the cost of keeping this nuclear waste, protecting this nuclear waste from further leaking, from further problems. This cost that is bared is not figured into a present cost analysis benefit. It is always carried forward to future governments, forward to the future generations. And this is something that we really, really need to take a look at, the cost of nuclear waste. And we need to stop it. The faster we can deal with this issue of cost, and the faster we can stop creating more waste, the lower the cost will be.
Thank you. Why don't we please the next question, who are you with, and please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ben Bergman with KPCC, and I have a question for Dr. Jaxo. You spoke very broadly about U.S. nuclear industry and how there's a lot of aging reactors whose life should not be prolonged, and I'm curious, would you include San Onofre in that category? And you also spoke broadly about plants not adopting, lessons from Fukushima. Could you apply that specifically to San Onofre?
On San Onofre, on the second part of your question, I have to just say I can't really comment because I just haven't followed close enough where they are with a lot of the Fukushima upgrades. They are not BWR designs. It's a different type of design, so some of the requirements would affect them. But and I think Peter touched on it there. As we look at plants, there was a conscious decision by the NRC in the mid-90s to make a process of license extension that would be focused very narrowly on what it really referred to as aging management issues. So, in essence, the basic overall safety of a plant was assumed, and then you would look at impacts from aging on those facilities. I think that accomplished largely what it was intended to do, or maybe not what it was intended to do, but it accomplished the relatively straightforward license extensions for most nuclear power plants in this country. There are some plants for which it has been a more contentious and more challenging process because some plants have some unique characteristics that have led to public hearings and other things. But in general, I think the reality is we're generally dealing with old technology. I mean, if you look at the Mark Is, this is very old technology. There have been retrofits and upgrades to some extent, but the basic design ideas are still many, many decades old. And to some extent, I think to a large degree, we'd be in a better place if we were replacing those with something else. But you can't do that overnight. Quite frankly, it's just not practical. So it may take decades, and it may take 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. But to a large extent, that is happening on its own. As Peter mentioned, Kewanee is now closed or will close. You look at Oyster Creek, which is a plant in New Jersey. They were given a license extension for 20 years because of a host of economic factors. They decided that they would shut down, plan to shut down before they went through their full extended period of license. You have Crystal River, which was in the midst of a license extension process. And interestingly enough, when I was chairman, they came to me and wanted that license extension process to continue and complete before they made a decision about whether they were going to make repairs to their containment structure. So I said no. I said, you need to decide whether you're going to repair it first, and if you can repair it successfully, then we'll talk about license extension. And they've now decided they don't want to basically risk $3 billion on the likelihood that it may not ever be repaired properly. So, when you look at a lot of plants, you're seeing now, I think, that the impacts of aging are showing up in a way that is making them less viable from an economic standpoint going forward, very much as Peter said. And I think that's just a reality, and it probably telling us something that maybe there are better places to put our resources and dollars than in continuing to kind of maintain an aging and challenged infrastructure.
But just given that you haven't been following it closely, do you think that San Onofre should be closed?
Well, that's a separate question from I think that I right now units 2 and 3 are shut down, and I honestly can't tell you. I just have not followed closely enough where they're going from here. Clearly, the tube degradation was a very surprising and unexpected phenomenon. In a mature technology, that's not what you would expect. It's not what you should expect. And I think more review at the time of the design, more review by the NRC would have been more likely to identify those challenges earlier. But at this point, it's largely it is largely the situation it is, which is shut down pending the ability to justify that it can continue to operate. And I think that's going to be a complicated and probably long drawn out process with a lot of legal challenges and other issues involved.
Mr. Gunnarsson wants to add a brief
Yeah,
comment.
promise less than a minute. And the LA Times asked the question too. There was a similar steam generator that ran through the NRC's 5059 process with a license amendment, and that was Palo Verde. Combustion reactors, roughly the same size. And the questions the NRC asked when they had the chance through the licensing process about fluid elastic instabilities, had those same questions been asked on San Onofre, likely this problem would have been detected by the public participation process.
Next speaker, please.
Hi,
Speak straight into the mic. Just bring it down. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Morgan Cook with the Orange County Register, and I have a question for Dr. Yasko. And sorry.
Well, yeah, I gotta hear your question before you
Yeah,
close it.
right. In your professional opinion, is there any way that San Onofre can restart and operate safely with the existing infrastructure, or do you think there would need to be significant technological changes, maybe not even necessarily restricted to the generators, but with how it handles and generates spent fuel?
Well, I think, I hate to answer these issues because, quite frankly, I haven't been on the job for about a year, and I haven't followed all these issues all that closely anymore. But I'll just say this. I think one of the last conversations I had before I left with the management on San Onofre was in regards to essentially their modeling capabilities for the steam generator tubes. And in my mind, the burden of proof rests with San Onofre right now to demonstrate not only that their models can show that the plant will operate without degradation of the tubes, but that they can demonstrate confidence in the modeling. Because of course their modeling previously showed that, or Mitsubishi's, or the combination of modeling. So the issue right now is not only do you have to be able to prove that your models, or that your models can get the answers you need, but that you can believe that the models are right. And that is a difficult problem. And I'm just looking at it kind of as an outsider now. The approach that's being taken is not one that instills tremendous confidence in me, because the approach is for an operation at reduced power. In principle, what you should see is design modifications and changes that allow operation at the licensed power levels. When you're operating at reduced power levels, that indicates that there are still areas of challenge with those steam generators operating at higher power rates. So in general, I think that that just raises a lot of questions to want to operate at 70% power, and I think that's a fairly novel idea to some extent within the NRC to be looking at, allowing a plant to operate at reduced power levels because of a safety issue. And plants operate at lower power levels to some extent for safety issues, but as a licensing matter to reduce the power level, it's in a way a very novel thing, and again just leads me, it would create doubt in my mind that there's a complete understanding of all the phenomena that are at play here and what the impact will be.
Thank you. Who is the next speaker, please?
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Jun Hori. I am a freelance journalist from Japan. I would like to know two questions. First, Mr. Khan, why you didn't expand the evacuation area from the reactor? Because U.S. government decided 50 miles from the reactor. And the government covered up the information about the meltdown. I would like to meltdown. The information about the meltdown. So I'd like to know the reason of your determinant. And next, Yatsuko, Mr. Yatsuko, what do you think about his determinant? This is my question.
Thank you.
日本語で言いましょうか。
After him, do we have additional journalists? I want to make sure we get all the journalists. So we do. Okay, why don't you stand behind him, and then we'll also take general public.
Thank you.
まず避難の範囲を考えるときに2つの違った観点が必要でした。
When thinking about the evacuation area, how large will the evacuation area be? I needed to think about two things.
一つは原子炉が爆発したとき直接にその被爆をする危険性がある範囲。
The first one is talking about the exposure, the dangers of the actual exposures. What were the actual exposures and what were those dangers? That's one thing I had to consider.
それについて原子力安全委員会などの専門家の意見を聞いて判断しました。
So let me qualify that. The supposed exposures. And in discussing these supposed exposures within a given evacuation range, okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, and after the hydrogen explosions, he had to consult with specialists that dealt with this information. 専門家に
例えば渡辺原子力安全委員長などの意見を聞いて決めました。
For example, one of those Watanabe was the Madarameっていうhe was the chief of the Nuclear Safety Commission.
その結果最初に5キロ、次に10キロ、さらに10キロ、さらには20キロから30キロ圏は行いたいというものを比較的早い段階で拡大して決めていきました。
And as a result of his consulting with this chief of the Nuclear Commission, at first they talked about a 5-kilometer radiation evacuation. Then it went to 10, then it went to 20, and finally only 30 kilometers evacuation zone.
もう一つの観点は原発から放射性物質が外に出てそれが拡大するあるいは流れていってその影響を考えて、避難する範囲を決めるというこの考え方がもう一つです。
Okay, so and then he had to think about the actual radiation. What was the actual amount of radiation exposure
これには
that came out, and what would have been the influence of this radiation exposure?
これはあなたは日本人だからご存知でしょうがスピーディーといったソフトを使うことさらにはモニタリングの結果をから判断すること、そういうことが必要です。
Okay, and so you are Japanese, June, and so you know very well about the monitoring situation with the speedy information that came into play.
で、次第にそういったものを含めた判断をその先ほどの第一の判断と加えて、一部拡大をしました。
And with the information that we got, this was the decision that we came up with.
アメリカからのこの50マイルというのは、アメリカの日本に在住している皆さんに対してそういう 避難の指示が出たということは聞いておりますが、我々自身日本政府としての判断は、それも情報としては知ってましたけども、今申し上げたような基準で、専門家の意見を聞いて決めたということです。
And so he knows very well about the orders from the U.S. consulate and the U.S. NRC to evacuate a 50-mile radius for all American nationals. And he, unfortunately, but his Japanese government, upon consulting with his experts, they decided otherwise.
またもう一点、
菅さん、今の部分で避難範囲を広げると東北自動車道が使えなくなって宮城や岩手に物資が届けられなくなるからという。
Let's just answer one time. We've got a lot of folks waiting here. And so maybe we can just wrap this. I think you already
So we're just
answered.
going to work with his first two questions, and we're dealing with the first one now.
もう一点のいろいろな情報を発表しなかったのは何ですか、あれ隠したのではないかといった趣旨の質問でした。
And there's a lot of information that says my information wasn't transparent. There was a lot of information that came in, and I didn't release that information.
しかし私のところに入った情報で、何か都合が悪いからといってそれを隠した情報は一つもありません。
However, the information that was given to him, all Japanese government officials, was not of the same information that
それは
he did not hide anything from his consultations with the inside government.
それはスポークスマンを務めた官房長官、枝野官房長官も全く同様だと言ってますし、私もそのことを信頼しています。
And the Chief Secretary of Government, Edano, also says the same thing, that they didn't hold any information back, and he stands by this.
しかしプライムミニスターである私やその官房長官に上がってこない情報がいろいろあったということはその後に次第に分かってきました。
Unfortunately, even Chief Edano has agreed to this, and we know that other information was presented after the decisions were made. And so
Let me interfere if he's almost done, because we're almost out of time. I'm going to extend it to 12:15,
Okay.
but maybe
Yeah.
we can speed the whole thing
Yeah.
up a little bit.
そういった意味でスピーディーもその例ですが、決して私はその官房長官がしたことを隠したということはありません。
And the information that he did receive from Speedy, there's all sorts of talk that it wasn't released. This is the information that he got, and so he stands by the decision made at that time. The other information came out afterward, and that's the crux.
All right, let me just go to the next speaker, please. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Libby Halevi, nuclear hot seat. And I was 1 mile from 3 Mile Island when the accident happened there. So, Mr. Bradford, I'm appreciative of you bringing up the human aspect of that issue. And that is the focus of this question. It is for Mr. Bradford, Mr. Yasko, and Prime Minister Khan. If you found yourself on the ground in close proximity to a nuclear reactor having a major accident, perhaps with members of your loved ones, your close family with you at the time, what would your reaction be, not as a person in authority, but as a person at the affect of the authority of people such as you once were? What would your personal response be, and what would you want the response to be of those people who held those positions of authority?
You want to go first? Well, I always hate to say it depends, but to some extent it does depend on what the immediate prospects are in terms of radiation releases, where I am in relation to where the wind is blowing, my fundamental impulse would be to get further away. And I can't add much to what I said earlier about hoping that the people issuing the advisories at the Washington end were thinking about that reactor as though they had lived within a few miles of it and knew a lot of people, and not just in the abstract or about their possible next job in the nuclear industry.
Well, just to follow on what Peter said, I mean, my first reaction would be to follow the advice of local officials. That is, in an evacuation, that's who you're going to be listening to, and that's who you want people to listen to. It's going to be the sheriff, it's going to be the local police, and that is extremely important, because if people don't follow those recommendations, you have more chaos, which can be more difficult to deal with than if you don't. So the challenge is building and ensuring that trust before you have the accident, before you have the incident, so that when it does happen, that people do feel confident to follow those recommendations. And the 50-mile decision in Japan came from the NRC staff. We had different technical information. We were getting different information, and so we went forward with what we thought was appropriate for Americans, not for all the people in Japan. We knew there was a small number of Americans who lived around the plant in Fukushima, so we could take a different kind of action, because we weren't ordering evacuations, we weren't doing any of those kinds of things. It was effectively a travel advisory. I mean, that was really the extent to say Americans should avoid this area, much like the State Department issues travel advisories for places that may have disease outbreaks, to avoid an area because of things like that. So it was doing a different thing, but it reinforced to me that at the crunch time, the people in the NRC who were making those decisions were making the decision based on what the technical data showed and what the right thing to do was to protect people. And we did that, and it was not without. We knew it was going to be difficult because it was different from what the Japanese government was saying. But that's what we thought was the right thing to do, and so we did it.
Mr. Prime Minister?
私が総理でなくてそこに住んでいる一人の市民であったとすれば、多くの方と同じようにまず政府に対して正確な情報を伝えるようにということを要求します。
If I was not Prime Minister and I was just like every suffering person waiting for instructions, I would want correct information from my government.
それに従って警察やそういう指示に従って、行動するというのが一番の原則だと考えます。
And the first premise, the most important premise, is to be able to follow what the authorities, what the law enforcement authorities and any other agencies are advising you to do.
しかし同時に長期にわたる低い線量の被爆に対する対応としては、場合によっては妊婦、子供、女性や小さい子供に対しては個別に判断をして、優先的に避難をするというそういう判断も場合によってはしたかもしれません。
However, and this is very important, when we're talking about low dose exposure from radioactive exposure, the most important thing to think about is the pregnant women, and children, and how to create your we really need to think about that when we create our priorities for who is evacuated first, because this low-dose exposure is a very, very important issue, and this is also depending on that low-dose exposure.
Thank you.
Arigato, thank you.
Thank you. Please, we have about 15 minutes, so let's get some folks. Go, please.
Don Lightning, DAV Safety Team. There's a lot of, how's this, better? Okay, sorry. Don Lightning, DAV Safety Team. There's a lot of heroes in this room, and I salute you all. I'd like to talk about nuclear risk. Nuclear risk is something that the people that live around these plants can do nothing about because they're not decision makers. So I would like to hear from each of you how we can transfer this risk to the utilities that run these reactors. Because unless they are at risk, they don't care. Using TEPCO as an example, after Fukushima, sure, their stock price went way down, but the Japanese government bailed them out, and they're going to make a huge profit on the decommissioning of those reactors.
Just get us a question, because we've got to
Right.
keep
So the
moving.
question is, how do we best transfer the risk to the utilities and take it off the backs of the people that live near the plants? Thank you.
All right. How about one panelist answer? How about,
Thank you.
who would like to do it?
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think one, you have to be involved, and you have to engage your elected officials. That's probably the most significant thing that you can do, because the system starts there. And you know, if you look at the NRC is a commission made up of 5 members who are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. I mean, you're fortunate here. You have 2 very strong senators, and Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer, who I think are very engaged on the San Onofre issues, and I think are very powerful and effective voices on that issue. But that is the most probably effective way that you can help ensure that there is appropriate risk sharing, and is engaging the elected officials who appoint the government officials, whether at the state or the federal level, that ultimately make the decisions that affect these facilities.
Thank you. I've been